Most of us, perhaps all of us, have wondered about and even wrestled with questions about life. For example, origins. Where did we come from? Or meaning. Does life have a purpose, or do we live a meaningless life and die? Another is morality. Why should we live any particular way at all? Is there an objective morality, or do we make it up as we go? Destiny is another one. What happens after we die? Do we cease to exist when we breathe our last, or do we continue existing at some point, and if so, do we go somewhere? There are many religions and belief systems. What are the areas of agreement and disagreement? Welcome to our merry band at the Fellowship of the Book, as we ponder the big question.
And the big question is, again, Islam. And we have the big guy to tell us about all things Muslim.
Hold on. Let me.
Just to get everybody's attention and wake you up.
Yeah, for sure.
So are we starting, Don? Is this it?
We're starting. We are live. You are live and on air, and you're mumbling around like a beginner.
That's me. Let's pray. Father, I thank you because you're a God of grace and mercy. Pray for Don's granddaughter, what's going on there, and we just pray you show mercy. And I thank you so much for showing mercy to my son yesterday, to Andy.
Yes.
And just thank you for all that means. Pray for the people we talked to at the fair the other day, for the Mormons I talked to and Trevor talked to last week. Pray for the atheists I'm going to talk to tomorrow for lunch, Father, and just pray for mercy and grace. And I pray that, Father, if there's people listening tonight and they're curious about Islam, or they're making a step towards it, or they're recovering from it, or whatever, Father, I'd say probably mostly in America we are nothing but ignorant. I pray, Father, this would be helpful for people out there. We thank you for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right, so 2 weeks ago when I got started, everybody has their outline handy, right? I asked my students if they bring their textbooks. You know how fun that is, so never mind. Anyways, I'll work off my outline while the rest of you sit there and pretend. So we started off, and we didn't get any further for the first section of this with the brief history of Islam, where I gave several dates and the significance of those dates and how they relate to us. And there was some statements about the fact that I didn't include a ton of stuff on Islam. You're right. There's so much more than we could talk about with Islam. So I'm not going to pretend to give everything I know, which is still just a drop in a bucket compared to the larger picture of what's happening around the world in Islam. You cannot understand today, right now, without understanding Islam. You can understand the war between Israel and Iran. You can understand how sworn enemies of Israel, who hate the Jews as passionately as anybody else, the Syrians, the Saudis, the Lebanese, the Jordanians, you can't understand why they're allowing Israeli planes to use their airspace to bomb the Iranians without understanding the history of Islam and the split between Sunni and Shia, which we mentioned briefly. I'll just introduce again quickly tonight. So all these things are very time specific in their day, and they're also incredibly relevant 1,400 plus years later right now. So briefly, the history of Islam. Muhammad was born in 570. He was orphaned at an early age, lived with family until he was 40. He was a businessman, quote unquote, which means he was a trader, and he was also a raider of caravans and things like that. In about 610, he started hearing visions. He was known to go meditate in a cave and other places like this, and he started hearing visions. His first impression of that vision was that he had been attacked by an evil jinn, Jinn, which is the Arabic word that we get our word genie from. This evil jinn had attacked him and knocked him down and gave him convulsions, foaming at the mouth. That's their own account of this. Everything I'm going to give you from their accounts. So this is their account of this and his own story. His wife convinced him that this was not a jinn, but this is in fact the angel Gabriel, or Gabriel in English, from the Bible, and that Gabriel was speaking to Muhammad, and Muhammad needed to pay attention. So Muhammad started going back more and more to hear more messages. As the story starts to fill out the messages are in fact, according to Muhammad, that the Qur'an, which means the recitation, the heavenly Qur'an was being recited by the angel Gabriel to Muhammad. So this is the eternal book, the heavenly book. There's an in-house Muslim argument over whether the book itself can be eternal, although that's often a title for it. because only Allah is eternal in Muslim theology. We'll get to that problem later. Anyways, so Muslims believe that Muhammad was receiving this message, and he would memorize it, recite it out to his followers, who would write it down on leaves, goat skins, whatever they could find to write on. And that's an interesting thing when we talk about the Quran itself later on. So anyways, that's the beginning of the story. Muhammad grew up in a polytheistic culture, the Quraysh tribe, his people in Mecca. And they're polytheists, they're pagans, like you see almost virtually everywhere else in the history of the world. And so his early message, and the first messages that really drive home from the angel Gabriel, was two things. One is, there is only one God, period, end of discussion. Now, he's hearing that in the middle of a polytheistic culture, but it's not like this is the first time he heard it. We'll talk about that later. Secondly, a judgment day is on top of us. It's so important. It's so much more important. I would say, I always use the analogy. You can watch for Christians, you can watch the Left Behind series 1,000 times, and it will never be as important to you as the end times is for the average Muslim. The idea of judgment day is so serious and it drives so much of how they think, as we look at the pillars tonight and other important parts of Muslim thinking. So he starts hearing this message. He goes out in the marketplace in Mecca, starts preaching, thinking that the Jews and Christians are going to, like him, especially the Jews. He was convinced that he was another prophet sent along in the Jewish tradition, the Jewish scriptures, the Torah, spoke about him according to him. And he was, surprised. The few Jews there in the audience didn't like him, and the Christians didn't like him either. They liked the part about one God and Judgment Day. They agreed with that. But as the message got fuller and he became the Rasul, the prophet, he became the seal, he became the man. And everybody had to pay attention to him as the only way to talk about what Allah's up to and to know who Allah is. Mm-hmm. That's when the Jews and Christians started to fall off. Now, it's going to become a bigger issue for the Jews up in Medina. But for right now, the Jewish population in Mecca is not accepting him. There's a horrible story about the Muslim community killing two different people there in Mecca. Anyways, this leads to 622, the most important date in the Muslim world. This is Hijra, the flight. This is when Muhammad is forced to flee with a small community of Muslims up to the Quraysh people's enemies, the tribes up in Medina. But Muhammad was a good warrior. a good businessman. And so the people in Medina recognized him as such, and put him basically in charge of the city government, in charge of the raids. And over the next 10 years, there's going to be about 82 separate battles between the tribes in Mecca and the tribes in Medina. So now he's fighting against his own people, sign of things to come. Anyways, so they've flown up there, they run away up to Medina. There's three main Jewish tribes who are not going to buy into Muhammad as another prophet along the lines of the Torah. That's going to bother him a whole lot. One of these tribes is one of the ones he wipes out virtually every single man. Mm-hmm. The Battle of the Trench, a horrific story we don't have time for. But anyways, in 630, Muhammad takes Mecca. He has an army of about 10,000 soldiers. This is pretty unknown in the Arabic world. They've been run over by most of the major powers, of ancient history, the Egyptians or the Babylonians, or all these different tribes that pretty much stomped all over the tribes in Saudi Arabia today. Anyways, they just, they never had a significant army like this. Boom, here comes this monstrous army. And Mecca surrenders. Does that bring him a good time? No, it doesn't. Muhammad has his list of 10, then he's going to go out, including some of his relatives that were enemies of his when he was in Mecca. He has them all killed. He surrounds the Kaaba, that black building in the center of Saudi Arabia, which none of us non-Muslims could have seen even a picture of 30 years ago. But now it's all over the internet. You can find pictures of beautiful Arabic script on this black building surrounding this black rock, which is very important. We'll talk about it later. And you'll often see thousands and thousands of people going counterclockwise around the rock, trying to work their way inside to kiss and touch the rock. So that's a very important part of the Hajj, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I'm going way too fast, probably for many of you. So if you have a question or comment or wonder what the heck I just said, please feel free to jump in and say, stop it, slow down, as I can do.
What if our question is like, who are you and why are you here?
I'm not taking any is from Don Vino, so let's just.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
He's already set me off tonight, so it's a bad.
Oh, it's already on a rough terms there.
Absolutely. All right, so 6:30, they take the city. Muhammad kills not only the group of 10, the list of 10, but they surround the Kaaba, which is filled with hundreds and hundreds of idols and all their attendants, the priests and the priest wannabes. And he kills every one of them. And virtually every textbook, and this is critical to us later on, virtually every historical text in American textbooks that addresses what happened when Muhammad took the city, they always say he cleansed the Kaaba.
Right.
And that's when I know that I'm just reading propaganda, because if you mean cleanse the Kaaba with gallons of blood, sure, I guess you can call that a cleansing, but that's not how the American audience says it. But that's how Muslims want the American audience to read that. So that's part of the public relations or dawah, evangelization, that goes on from the Muslim world into the American or the Western world. Okay, so anyways, he takes the city, wipes out all the pagan worshippers. He slaughters this whole Jewish tribe I mentioned earlier. It is a Jewish slave, a woman whose husband and son were killed by the Muslim army, that works in his kitchen and poisoned him. Again, every textbook you will ever read here in America, written by world religion scholars or something like this that I used in the colleges for years, every single textbook says after a short illness the prophet died. They don't mention how he died. It was a horrific death. It tortured him. It was really cruel. And whatever poison was used, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it ate him alive. In the middle of this, he's asking his scribes, his followers, for ink and something to write on, which is really curious because part of the Muslim claim, again, part of dawah, is how could the Qur'an, such a wonderful book, be written by an illiterate person? Those of you familiar with Mormons, you hear the exact same argument that Joseph Smith was an illiterate country boy. He couldn't have written something as complex as the Book of Mormon. Well, the same thing is said about Muhammad and the Quran, except that he couldn't write, except there at the end, all of a sudden he can write. How that happened. Interesting. Okay, so he dies in 632. Within a few short period of time, there's a fight over what it means to be the caliph. The caliph is the Arabic word for successor. In the Sunnah or Arabic tradition, amongst the Arab tribes, the attitude had always been our best man, best warrior, smartest guy, at some combination thereof, will be the leader of our tribe. So this is the majority attitude amongst Muslims as to who should be the first caliph after Muhammad. The minority view, which is we know as the Shia, party of Ali today, the Shia view was that no, it should be a blood relative. So if you understand, like, the European attitude about, royalty, or the Japanese attitude, you see this in a lot of different parts of the world where somehow, magic blood passes from one generation to the next. Can't understand the story of King Henry and how the English church split off without getting some little bit of that. Okay, so anyways, the divine right of kings versus Arabic tradition. Arabic tradition wins out for at least the first three caliphs, who were all killed. The fourth caliph, Ali, is later killed, but he's the who's going to become the Shia representative. He's the Shia guy. He's the one we wanted all along. He's a blood relative. Two different ways they figure it to Muhammad, and he gets killed. So here we are, all these centuries later, virtually just short of 1,400 years, like I said before, and the Sunni and Shia are still killing each other. Yep. And one of the reasons the Saudis and everybody else is willing to let even the Jewish army, have advantages through their airspace and stuff, is because they're terrified of the Shia army in Iran. Is the largest regional army out there. And so the Saudis, nobody else has got an army anywhere close. And so the Jews are their friends now in this fight against the larger Shia powers. Okay, this has gone back and forth for, like I said, almost 1,400 years. Anyhow, back to 632. Within 6 years, one of the caliphs has taken over the Holy Lands, Israel, not Palestine, has conquered Israel, all of which was owned by the Greek Byzantine, which is nominal Eastern Christianity. By 711, Muslim armies have taken over all of Spain, North Africa first, then Spain. They're stopped halfway across France in the Battle of Tours or Poitiers, which is 732, or else a lot of us would be speaking Arabic right now. Very likely, but God intervened, I would argue. Anyways, but they also invaded into the stands they'd invaded Persia much earlier, all the way into India. Millions and millions of people have died in the name of conquering for Allah. We'll talk about jihad later and how important that is. Okay, so that's real quick back history. There's so much more. I gave a few modern dates that are somewhat relevant. 1917, Turkey's on the losing side of World War I. The Caliph, the center, especially in particular the Sunni world, had been in Constantinople. Istanbul. They say return the land. I'm like, okay, let's start with Istanbul. Make it Constantinople again, then we can have a discussion. Okay, which fell to the Muslim conquest in 1453, and here we are 400 years later. The center of the Muslim world has now collapsed, and the new president of Turkey, Ataturk was his name, was an atheist, a Marxist, and he said, I renounce the caliphate. Oh boy, this is big. Ooh. There is no successor. We can't fight to take over the lands that we're supposed to take. In other words, the whole world, the house of the sword, the Darlis. I can't remember it. We screwed this up 2 weeks ago too. I don't know why.
It's a tough twister.
All right, it is. It's not that hard. Anyhow, we can't qualify. We can't reconquer the Spain that belongs to us, Andalusia. We can't reconquer formally Israel without a caliph to lead us in the way of the Prophet, in the way of Allah. And so that was a huge blow. 1924, the Muslim Brotherhood basically gets its start. By 1928, it's in full-blown motion. Basically, it's a response to the fact that we need a caliph. And so many of the groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or Abu Sayyaf, or so many different groups around the world, almost all of them point back to the Muslim Brotherhood as their inspiration for why we do what we do. Even in modern history, they took over Egypt several years ago with President Obama's blessing. They were later thrown out. Their hands, their footprints, their fingerprints are literally all throughout the world, and death and violence is followed wherever they go. Again, part of the reasoning is we have to bring back a caliph, and only then can we do what we need to do. All right, other important dates: 1948. There's Israel. I became a Christian because of the prophecies concerning Israel. There's a long story there, but anyways, this is a horrible thing. This is absolutely horrible. This is even more horrible than when the Spanish reconquered in 1492 and drove out all the Muslims that they'd had for 700 years. Because Israel's obviously the center of the world, and Muslims are taught that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is there in Temple Mount, at least supposedly on Temple Mount, that is the far mosque that Mohammed had talked about. It doesn't say Jerusalem in the Quran. It talks about Muhammad taking a night vision, and the Hadith kind of played this up. They took a night vision, rode on a horse to the far mosque, and Muslims have been trained to think that that's the mosque in Israel today on the Temple Mount. Of course, the mosque wasn't there when Muhammad was alive. It was built many years later, but nevertheless, that's what Muslims are trained to think. So Jerusalem has a central part of the Muslim story in their minds, right? Which is, part of so many of the fights that we have today. But, Yerushalayim, the city of peace, which never had peace. Well, here you have Jews, Christians, and Muslims all claiming this same place as a holy place. And the United Nations says, just let us run it, we'll fix it. Yeah. Yeah, the blue hats have always fixed every country they've ever been to, haven't they? Okay, so there's so many other dates. The Battle of Badr, 624. It was a small little battle, maybe 50 people killed, but a small Muslim army had beaten an army from Mecca at the time of almost 1,000. So in their mind, 300 beat 1,000. The only way we can do that is with Allah's will. This drives their mentality. The Battle of Badr does. It's like the Battle of the Alamo for the Texans I mentioned before, in that if we have Allah's help and we're doing by Allah, we're acting right the way Allah wants us to, we're being righteous in the way of Muhammad, we're following all his commands, he will give us victories, even over a much larger army. Hence, they'll claim that they drove the Soviets out of Afghanistan, that type of thing. Can't understand the Taliban without understanding all that mindset. That's the Battle of Badr. So there's a ton of other dates that are really important. We don't have time for it, just giving you the ones we do, or a little bit of them. So let me move to the second part of the outline. If you were to have had it, but you don't.
I do.
Okay, one of you.
And it's online. They can print it off.
One of you gets a passing grade today. The rest of you, I'm not.
No, I have it also. I have it on my phone.
Okay, sure. Now look at
Ah,
Oh, now they're
there you
popping
go.
out.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. The second is the brief theology of Islam. I'm going to give you basically what they teach, and then maybe a few points of showing that there's some major problems with their attitudes. So let's first talk about their source material, and that's the Quran and Hadith. Now, the Quran is the most perfect book ever written, not only in Arabic, it's the best Arabic ever written. It's the most perfect book. It's never been changed. It's never been translated, unlike your Bibles, of course, which have been translated so many times. Who knows? And you hear that from atheists and New Agers and everybody else, that the Bible's been translated and lost. We have no clue. Problem is, we have thousands and thousands of early Christian documents, and we have thousands of all sorts of other documents, whether it's the Dead Sea Scrolls or things like this, that show that the biblical text is remarkable in how close it is. Well, there's no parallel for that in Islam. Most of the documents were gone. Even during Muhammad's lifetime, many of the documents were lost. Many of the people who have become memorizers of the Quran, in other words, they were listening to Muhammad repeat the words that he memorized allegedly from Gabriel. Many of them were killed in battle, and those sections were lost. Other pages were eaten by sheep. There's so many bizarre parts of this, but this is the most perfect book even written. It's not been translated in 1,000, different translations like your Bible. You can't be trustworthy. Of course, all this is a fairy tale. And there's a video you can watch on right now where a lady brings into a Speaker's Corner in London. This is just a few years ago, where she brings in 26 current translations of the Quran in Arabic. Not my big copy here is English and Arabic. If you have German or French or Russian or a bunch of other languages, you can get these Qurans. These are given to me by the Saudis, but you can get these all over the place. Interesting enough, just as far as attitude towards the Quran, the Arabic is Allah's word. The English translation is not, even though it's their own translators. Same with me with French or Russian or any other translation. Only the Arabic is Allah's word. Now, it's very common. We'll talk more about talking to them at the last week of our session, how we converse with them. If you find a problem in the English, whatever, they almost routinely, that's not in the Arabic. And of course, since 99% of us don't speak Arabic, it's pretty tough. So if you're going to do full-time missions to Muslims, obviously you need to understand Arabic or Farsi if you're going to be in Iran or something like this. Anyways, they will hide behind the translation. But again, this thing has so many problems. And even amongst Muslim scholars, how many chapters are supposed to be in 111, 114, 116? They just have different arguments amongst themselves, which you're not supposed to know about. You're just supposed to accept their word that this is the most perfect book that's ever been written. It's never been mistranslated. It's unlike the Bible. That's really their attitude. Now, the Quran, the recitation, is unfortunate. You'll notice the actual Quran is actually smaller than the New Testament, and this is huge, right? That's because there's a ton of commentaries from different Muslim scholars over the years. It's not written in chronological order. We have no idea. If you did not have the commentaries, you would literally, unless you grew up in that culture and really heard the stories your whole life, you would have no idea how these stories fit together. But the commentators are here to help you fit it together and also walk through some of the more troubling verses in the Quran itself. And so part of what we have to look at, like Christians have denominations, Muslims have at least four major, this is just the Sunni, not the Shia. And there's the Druze and the Alawites, and there's Sikh and Baha'i, and there's so many other Muslim groups, Sufis and so on. So just talking about the Sunni and the Shia is the big ones for right now. Even amongst the Sunni, they have four major fiqhs, F-I-Q-H-S, which is basically somewhat analogous to our idea of denominations. These are traditions of scholars. Very common, a Salafi fiqh is probably a very prominent one in modern Islamic interpretation. So it's a tradition of scholars, much you might reject this analogy, but much like the Lutheran or the Reformed traditions or an Anglican tradition or something like that. The fiqhs have that power. So Muslims will interpret different sections, that might seem problematic in different ways depending on the fiqh that they're a part of. Does this make sense so far?
So far.
Okay.
So I have one, a question. I had a few years back, I had a woman who had been contacting me, and we were talking about how we can know what Allah has said. And she said, well, you have to read the Quran in the original language.
Yes.
I said, okay, so help me understand this. Are you saying that that Allah can only truly communicate through the Quran, not any other work? Yes. So wouldn't that mean that you have a kind of a limited God? Because I know people that can speak 6 or 7 languages and actually communicate quite well in all of them. So they seem to me superior in communication abilities than Allah. Is that true?
Okay, so any of you, if you've interacted with the Baha'i, you will see a version of this type of argument. The Baha'i claim that there was 9 prophets sent out into the world. They had 9 mirrors. If you go to any Baha'i temple, there's a couple of big ones. And those are manifestations where God sent out his message to all these religions, and guess what? They all screwed it up, except for us, of course, except for Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i guys. Well, Islam has the same thing. Islam says all the other religions in the world got the revelation from Allah. He sent prophets to everybody, Hindus, Buddhists, whatever, and they all screwed it up. What he didn't do is he saved his most special work for the end. The Arab peoples did not have their own prophet. So when Allah spoke to the Arab people through that prophet, he becomes the last of the prophets, the seal, therefore the most superior, because it's the only one, unlike every other prophet, every other tradition, that has not been corrupted. So that's why you have to read it in the Arabic, Don. That's the attitude. Of course, the limited God thing is a serious problem. I'm sorry, this is so important. Why can't, even when you pray, you can't say, they'll say, oh, English, the argument you give us as English-speaking people, oh, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. It's not any specific God. Lie. Secondly, it's just, even why there's even Arab Christians who use the word Allah for God in their translations of the New Testament. Oh, very interesting. It's amazing what dhimmis or conquered people will do over time. They'll call God Allah because they don't want to get killed. But that's a different point. My point is really simple. You're not even, if Allah is just a generic term for God, then why aren't you allowed to pray to Dios or to, all sorts of other words for God in different languages on every part of this planet? No, when you pray only to Allah. Okay? And that's really critical. And we're going to talk about Allah a little bit farther down. We'll get to Allah's specifics, some of the backdrop there. Anyway, so the Quran is the recitation. The Hadiths, okay, this is the first volume of Bukhari. There's 9 volumes I got up on my shelf. Really nice bound. I love the calligraphy. It's really pretty. I couldn't begin to understand it, but it's really well known. Bukhari is the majority, not the only, but the majority for Sunnis. I almost like, first question, so you're Muslim? Oh, okay. Almost immediately. So do you accept Bukhari, al-Bukhari? And almost, oh, yeah. Because when I quote Bukhari later, I say, well, that's Bukhari, that doesn't matter. Well, I'm sorry, you told me earlier that you accepted him, which most Muslims will say they do. Now, what are hadiths? It means stories. So you can't understand Sharia law without understanding the stories that are all over the world. Bukhari himself, and he's writing this about 150 years after Muhammad, roughly, or collecting these, let's put it that way. Depends on who you're talking to now. Is that you, Doc? Okay, anyways, Bukhari says there's 750 to 800,000 separate hadiths out there. So Muslims have a scale from strong to weak, and you're, depending on the idea. So, here's Bukhari. He says he collected about 150,000 of the most strongest. What does he mean by strong? That means that most Muslim scholars will accept that it's true. That it's got some background to it. Well, this was recited from Ibn so-and-so, and he learned it from even that guy, and off you go with a list of Arab names, and in the Muslim world, these mean something. And so it's sources for them, and so those are considered strong hadith, strong stories. Why is that important? Because Sharia, or law, Allah's law in particular, Sharia law is mostly based on Muhammad's examples, on the stories about him. So I'm just making this up, but it's basically something like, so the prophet and I went down to this village and this is what he did, X, Y, and Z. That's the whole story. And so his example, Okay, and we're going to get to Muhammad himself. Why is this so important? His example becomes the guiding example for all Muslims everywhere to follow. He is the most perfect man. He's the only one who did not sin, depending on who you talk to, even though the Quran says differently. He's the only one who perfectly followed Allah's will at all time. Therefore, whatever Muhammad did in his stories about him, well, that makes it okay for us. So, for example, Aisha, who's a prominent player, his last wife is, which one you read, the 13th wife, the 6-year-old, when he married her.
Right.
She is beloved by the Sunnah and tradition, hated by the Shia versions of the Hadith. They have no use for her at all, because the Sunnah and Shia have been killing each other forever. She was not a friend of Ali, and Ali was not a friend of hers way back. So, anyhow, she relates the story in here about how she was 6 when she married the Prophet. Her dad, Abu Bakr, was the first caliph, and maybe Muhammad's closest friend and ally, his biggest general, blah, 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 blah. Depending which story you read, the Prophet was, receiving a gift from Abu Bakr. He freely gave his 6-year-old daughter to be his wife. And there are other Arabic stories that talk about the fact that Abu Bakr was absolutely outraged that the Prophet would want a 6-year-old girl for what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this. This depends on which story and which tradition you're going to follow here. Anyways, the stories include a lot of things. The stories include torturing a man to find out where he buried his treasure. The stories include many different conquests. What do we do with the women? We've just killed their men. Some of them are pregnant. Do we have to wait before we have sex with them, or can we just rape them now? It's kind of a serious question. Muhammad's response, well, let me go talk to Allah and I'll find out. So there's stories in here. Stories about, I was listening to David Wood talk about this, and I remember this distinctly. In the 60s, you had many people reciting this claim that the Christianity was the white man's religion, and Islam was the religion for people of color, particularly American blacks, who are so disaffected by American racist culture in some places, and hardcore in some places. And of course, also a fairy tale. They joined the Nation of Islam, which is not even a real Muslim religion, but a New Agey cult. But anyways, you can see Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and all these important American black people who, basically reciting this line, that Christianity is the white man's religion. Well, it took a while before white people got onto the show. They were more busy, persecuting the Christians than they were signing on. They did come on, and Europe becomes primarily Christian over the course of many hundreds of years. But Christianity was spreading in Africa long before it was spreading in Europe. That's for a fact. And it was spreading in Asia, and it was spreading in all sorts of places, in the Chinese royal city in Beijing, and the emperor's palace itself within the 2nd century, this type of stuff. So anyways, this is a joke. Anyways, why do I bring that up? Because Muhammad, in the hadith, in the story, shares the special names he had for his black slaves, and they were not nice. Quite insulting. He was involved with slavery quite deeply, which is why most Muslim countries still, at least under the table, still practice slavery, because you have to, because Muhammad, the most perfect man who ever lived.
Yeah.
You're really a sick puppy. You go in the deep, dark net. You can find the slave trade and the slave auctions in Libya and places like that right now. So this has never gone away. And most of the Muslim nations signed on with the United Nations in the last 75 years. I think Saudi Arabia was 77, 78, not that long ago. Well, okay, slavery's a bad thing. Publicly. Okay?
Right.
And not the real way. Because you can't renounce what the Prophet did. You can never renounce the Prophet because he's the most perfect man. So how do we know what he did? It's right here in the Hadith. So the Quran is Allah's word from the eternal book, recited through Gabriel. And the Hadiths, the stories, are the life of Muhammad and his immediate followers and stuff like this. All right, so everybody understand the distinction? Now, the average Muslim, this is Allah's word and only Allah's word. Yeah, but the attitude is both of these are equally important. And I found that routinely in talking to Muslims that, the Hadith is just as important as the Quran, until it says something embarrassing like the slavery thing I just told you. And of course, it's embarrassing in their world, but it is embarrassing if you're trying to sell it, through dawah, through evangelization here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are so, if I could just add, they're so embedded with Hadith as well, because from what I understand, that if Allah entered a room and he stepped into the room with his left foot, you have to do the same thing and enter a particular room with the left foot, exactly as he did it. So they're emulating exactly what he did through those stories.
Yeah, some of you might remember. I was always a big fan of Monty Python before as a Christian. I still kept up with Monty Python after I was a Christian.
Yeah.
One of the worst movies they ever did in my mind is called The Life of Brian, which is
Yeah.
a parable, a weak parable with a couple of interesting points, but a weak parable about Jesus, but somebody
Right.
else called Brian. It was kind of a parallel at the time. And people started following him. And at one point, Brian is running away from the crowd. He doesn't want to have people following him. And he drops a shoe. When his sandals falls off.
Mm-hmm.
And he's running away with one shoe on. And the group comes up. Oh, he only wants us to wear one shoe. So they all take off their shoes.
Yeah.
Right. That's not what Christianity says. Not even coming close.
Right.
But that is what, like James said, that is literally what Islam believes, that Muhammad is the perfect man. There's a special word in Arabic that I can't recite, but to explain just how important he is. And so you can never lose sight of that, because so many of the horrific things that happened are literally because this is what the Prophet said and did.
Exactly.
You talk to a lot of Muslims, if you listen to ISIS, obviously I'm not recommending listening to anything ISIS puts out. They're just as big now as they were 10 years ago when Obama was president, stuff like that, maybe bigger. If you listen to them talking to other Muslims, to doing their own propaganda efforts, and they're preaching against other Muslims, we're doing it, we're doing it like the Prophet did. Why aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
That's why they put out these videos of beheading Christians and Jews and pagans and everything, because this is what the Prophet did.
You're supposed to do the same.
It's horrific to us, but to them it's a sales pitch.
Right.
It shows that we're doing the real thing. And I was telling someone the other day, watching in Manti, the festival that the Mormons put on every year till the last few years, watching an FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, that so horrific, talking to a regular LDS, the Salt Lake brand. His argument was exactly the same. We're doing exactly what Joseph and Orson and everybody did. Why aren't you?
Yeah.
So it's going back to the original, at least in their own minds.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on. The 5 pillars is the next thing on your outline. 5 pillars or obligations.
Can you hold that 1 second?
I suppose.
Well, here's a comment that I thought would be worth weighing in on.
Yes.
I'm no expert. It seems to me that they are also worship Muhammad. Now, in a sense, isn't that real? I was thinking about that myself. As you're describing, they're doing everything he does exactly the way he does it. Aren't they essentially worshiping Muhammad?
Okay, a Muslim would throw himself to the ground and tear his hair off if you said that to him, that he's worshiping Muhammad.
Oh, yeah.
Great insult. But it's pretty much the attitude.
Right.
I had a Muslim in my class. This lady was screaming at me. We got on this whole point because I said the words holy prophet.
Oh.
And he's not holy. He's not holy. No. She's Syrian. She claimed to be Palestinian, of course. Anyways, she made a big deal out of it. I said, so look, hang on a second. I just Googled holy prophet. There's almost 1 million hits. Because most Muslims have no problem with calling him holy.
Yeah.
Not even close. He is set apart. He is unique. He is not like you and me.
Right.
Mentality, if only I could fight like he did. If only I could have sex with a gazillion women one night like he did. If only I could do whatever Muhammad did, I'd be the happiest man around. But he would not call himself God. That's shirk, S-H-I-R-K. That is the ultimate blasphemy, the ultimate sin. Definitely, immediately. If you associate anything in this created world with Allah, the Creator. So that's a biggie. And that is the biggie as far as sin goes.
Right.
But they do. Nathan, your point is exactly right. Muhammad, pray for me, much like Catholics with Mary. By the way, I should also bring up, Muhammad does so many silly things in the Quran itself. He misquotes the Bible routinely. A huge part of the Muslim religion is the traditions, the Hajj and the kissing the stone and everything was in existence long before. It's what all the pagans did. But one of the interesting things is how badly Muhammad understands the Trinity. Now, many people think he had a Catholic weird uncle, perhaps some type of Marianite, and who probably talked about Mary every other word, like some Catholics tend to do. And so Muhammad's understanding of the Trinity, this is what you Christians believe the Trinity is, and it's in the Quran, so it's absolutely written in eternity. It must be true. Is that, God the Father, Mary the Mother, Jesus the Son.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Muslim attitude is, well, this is just like the pagan religions. You got the God having sex to create women. And I've had Muslims throw this at me. They said, no, do you want to talk about this? Talk to the LDS. Okay.
Exactly.
They're the ones that believe God's having sex to produce Jesus. No religion ever is called the Trinity, God the Father, Mary the Mother. Now, do some Catholics act like there's a fourth person in the Trinity? It sure seem to. They can formally deny it all they want, but as far as lay people, again, I've been in the Philippines numerous times. Mary's more important than almost anything else that I can think of in the Catholic world, especially Guatemala, the Philippines, places like this.
Mexico.
Maybe Mexico. Mohammed is serious. Yeah, okay, so I'm not trying to get into the Catholic discussion right now, but yeah, you're right. A lot of people think that, because that's how a lot of people seem to act. When I went to Jerusalem, went to the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus was so, the tradition is that's where he was crucified. People kiss that stone. And it's been kissed by who knows how many millions of people, and it's so smooth. And I was a Baptist missionary at the time, and I'm like, oh, what the heck? Not kissing no rock. I'm sorry.
Not with all those lips in there.
Oh yeah, well,
disinfectant.
If Jesus, was killed there, then this is an important place. I get it, but that no on the rock. Sorry, can't do it. And it would seem like that's when we get to the Kaaba and the black stone there. That seems to be a critical point as well, which we can get to. Let's do the pillars first. We have more jumping in here. Okay. So what are the pillars or obligations? This is the 5 most important things. You cannot really talk about Allah's your father. That's absolutely a no-no.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot really say that you know God in some meaningful sense. That's so common for Jews and Christians, especially us Christians, to talk that way, that we know who God is. We know his love, his mercy. We know his holiness, at least a little bit. We'll talk in this way. And theologians have written gazillions of books on this. You don't really have the same phenomena in Islam about who Allah actually is. Allah is so transcendent, so removed from the world, that you can't really know him in that meaningful sense. And of course, he can't be seen in the world, so that's true. So how do we know anything about Islam? Here's the grocery list. Here's the rules. Here's his will. Do what he tells you to do. Submit. A Muslim is one who submits to the will of Allah, Islam. So you can know his will. And the 5 pillars are literally the centerpiece of Allah's will. So there's 5 of them. Real quickly, when you say the words in faith, usually in front of an audience, in Arabic alone, shahada, there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet, then you have become a Muslim. That right there, it's that simple. Okay, You don't have to go into a lot of deep beliefs about anything. At that point, you're just submitting yourself quite literally to the will of Allah. Oh, by the way, you must understand that Muhammad is the prophet.
Is the messenger,
Not a prophet, the prophet. He's the final, he's the seal, he's the guy.
He's it.
You have to understand that. So that's the first one. And I'll just do these real quickly. You have to give 2.5% of your income. All right. Now, there's Arabic terms for all this. You can look it all up. I can recite it to you if you're bored. But you must pray, depending on the tradition, 3 to 5 times a day. Original Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem, interestingly enough, because he thought he was going to get the Jews on his side. Only later on does he have Muslims praying towards Mecca. So you can get on a plane going anywhere in the world. If the Muslims on the plane, they need to know when it's time to pray, which direction they should pray to. It's very important to them that you pray, again, depending on the tradition. There's a ton of rules about the prayers. I'm not going to go into all those. Some of them are really silly to most of us, but anyways, you got to pray 3 to 5 times a day. And usually in the morning, if you go to a Muslim-dominated city, if you even go to Jerusalem or a place like this, you'll see a high tower. That's on purpose. Islam is above all religions. And there's a special name for these guys. They've memorized the Quran, and it's a call to prayer. Wake up, O Muslim, it's time to get up. Prayer is better than sleep, and all sorts of stuff like this. So there's always, important prayers to them being recited during the day. The next one is the fast or the feast, depending on who you talk to, of Ramadan. And again, Sunnah and Shia are different on some of these things. So without going into this, I'm going to try to just kind of stick to the majority view. So the holy month, Ramadan, okay, in this case, means you have to go basically for 30 days without eating or drinking or sex during daylight hours, period, in the discussion.
Right.
And this makes you makes you special. Those darn Jews and Christians, look at them eat. Look at them, stuff like this. They're bad people. And in a Muslim-run place, that can get you, in real trouble physically. You can get hurt really bad if you're seen eating out loud when Muslims are not allowed to. Muslims oftentimes will turn their work schedules around so that they're sleeping during the day and working at night. Why is that important? Because I'll get to your question on the Mati later, but what's important about it is that at nighttime it's party time. Christmas, 4th of July, your birthday, it is everything important. There's huge feasts and fasts. Muslims will give each other presents. It's a very important time of the year for them. There's a special feast at the end and all this kind of stuff. But all of this stuff relates to the fact that Muhammad set out this standard. Now, there's all sorts of discussion about whether this was being practiced prior to Muhammad as well. I'm not an expert in that particular one on Ramadan itself. But it's not a fast in the way Americans have been trained to think generically about fast. Again, at nighttime you can eat and drink everything you want. But during the day you will fast. A lot of Muslims are so serious about this that they won't even swallow their own spit lest they feel like they defied, or somehow defiled the fast. And on the prayer thing, you'll often see this with some of the ISIS guys, and there's some of the Al-Qaeda guys and stuff like this. You'll see these guys, and you see this brown spot in the center of their forehead. Yeah. They're not Hindus. Okay, no. This is not paint. This is because they are so faithful and they're recognized by other Muslims. This is a sign to other Muslims. I am so submissive to the will of Allah. I grind my head into the prayer book. I am putting a permanent mark there. Yeah. And it shows how sincere you are in your prayers to other Muslims. So that's considered a badge of honor for these folks. Okay, so we got Shahadah, we got prayer, we got fasting, we got giving, we have Ramadan. Then we get to the Hajj. Now, this is very important for all sorts of reasons. It's hard to understand why a person is willing to walk into a Pizza Hut filled with Jews and blow themselves up, or drive planes in the World Trade Center, or do a zillion other things that have been done without understanding the Hajj itself. And of course, the Hajj doesn't say that, but we'll get to the importance part of this. The Hajj, which existed, by the way, long before Muhammad, people were coming to Mecca to see that black stone. We'll get to that later. Every able-bodied, watch my language, male Muslim at some point in their life must make a pilgrimage to Mecca. There's a whole series of things you do there. You go counterclockwise. You have to touch the stone, kiss the stone for a minute. You have to go out and throw rocks at the devil. There's all sorts of steps you have to go through.
Do the hokey pokey.
I'm sorry?
Do the hokey pokey.
I can't understand.
Do the hokey pokey and turn
Do the
yourself
hokey pokey and turn yourself around.
Stop it.
I want to throw rocks at the devil.
Okay, if we can get serious now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, there's always some in the crowd every time, I tell you. All right, so you started it. Different things as part of the Hajj. All right, there's some rules. You cannot borrow money. All right, Muhammad specifically do that. You must be a man. It's able-bodied. So here's the point. This is one of the 5 most basic things you must do. Again, so many different Muslims have so many more additions to this grocery list. It's the big 5. Yet most Muslim men do not make the Hajj, cannot make the Hajj for various reasons. Maybe they're poor. If you're some poor beggar in the streets of Lebanon, your chances of making the Hajj are next to impossible. Plus, depending on the attitude between the Sunni and Shia, the Sunni, the Saudi government is Sunni, who control Mecca and Medina right now. There's been times where they've cut off the Shia for years because of the conflicts between the two. There's been people killed every year I've been alive. You hear these terrible stories about people getting trampled because you have a set amount of time that you have to go through this whole process. So the Saudis opened this up several years ago. It was only 2 million men per year, but then they ended up to 3 because it's so hard to do what I'm about to tell you about. Okay, so this is one of the 5 basic things you absolutely must do. That you can't borrow money. So if you're poor, you're in trouble. If you're not connected to some oil family or some, royal princess family like this, you're going to have a hard time. Plus, rich Muslims have often made more than one Hajj. So if one Hajj makes Allah happy, surely 2 or 3 will make him even more happy. That takes up some of the slots. Let's say it's 3 million now. That takes some of the slots up there. Plus, once in a while, women will make the Hajj. They're not required to. There's nothing in the Quran about women taking the Hajj, but they will. This also takes up slots. So now, if you're desperate to get in, you want to make the Hajj. You have to make the Hajj. This is so critical. You got to be sure you're right with Allah. You got to get into paradise. You got to do the 5. But what if you can't? So again, at least by today's numbers, the estimates are that there's about 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just a World Book type of number. That makes, I'm just going to estimate, that makes roughly 900 million Muslim men have to make the Hajj once in their lifetime. We'll do the math at 3 million a year and see how that works out. In other words, most Muslim men will never make the Hajj. Right. Through some of them, no fault of their own, they want to, they live for it. And for people who have made the Hajj, I mean, it changed Malcolm X's life if you follow that story at all. He was such a racist, and he sees all sorts of white people there in the, at the Hajj, and that changes his whole thing. He becomes a traditional Muslim instead, and that's part of what got him killed. But anyways, it's a terrible thing. You can't make the Hajj. And so for a lot of Muslims, well, maybe I won't do the prayers every day, and maybe I'll have a beer with the guys, and maybe I'll chase a skirt that I shouldn't. Maybe I won't do quite as much of the other things seriously because there's no way I can make the Hajj. Oh, but Allah has help for you. And that's found in the next line in your outline called the 6th pillar. And this is jihad, Jihad, an Arabic word for struggle. Now, the second most important book in the Quran, in the Middle East, the second highest selling book behind the Quran itself, is Mein Kampf, which is German for My Struggle, written by Adolf Hitler, of course. It was often praised and criticized by Muslim leaders all over the Saudi, and Egypt and Cairo University and stuff like this. He did a pretty good job, but he didn't finish the job. Interesting attitude. Okay, so Mein Kampf, My Struggle. The struggle, if you listen to any Muslim on CNN or MSNBC or something like that, that's not about war or violence. That's the struggle a Muslim man has to do to get up and make the prayers and to not eat during the daylight. It's the internal struggle, and there are verses in the Quran that reference that way. But there's so many more verses in the Quran and basically all of the hadiths which point out to what jihad really is. It's the struggle to bring the world under Allah's control. Right. This is Allah's world. It's slipped away. Muslim doesn't, if you're American, you're a Buddhist or whatever, you're a Jewish, Christian, and you become a Muslim, you have not converted necessarily, you have reverted back to your original faith. All of us are born Muslims. And then we turn away because of bad cultural influences and the evil world of Shaitan and stuff like this to become Christians, Jews, whatever else. So this world has fallen away from Allah's will mysteriously. And so we need to bring it back under Allah's will, all right? And so we have to go from the Dar al-Islam, the house of peace, the Dar al... word for sword is out of my brain, I swear. Somebody told it to me last week, I don't remember for a minute. Anyways, the Dar al-House of the Sword is where jihad is open to conquer, to bring the world into submission. The whole religion is about submission, back into the house of Islam, okay? Again, the word doesn't mean peace. There's no peace inside the house of Islam, as we notice right now and stuff like this. Okay, so why is this important? Because it goes back to everything I said. What if I can't keep the pillars? What if I struggle? And I know I struggle with getting up for prayers. I don't make the mosque on Friday like I should to hear the sermons. Every once in a while I'll have a beer with my buddies. Again, I've been chasing this girl down the street for a while. That's not good either. I'm just not doing what I'm supposed to do. I haven't given enough of my income and all this kind of stuff. And 2.5% is not much, but that's what you're required to bring. So how do I get around this dilemma? And especially knowing that I cannot, or probably never will be able to afford the Hajj itself. What do I do? The Jihad comes in. So in the Hadith, very important story. It says this: you might be a hair's breadth from paradise, their version of heaven, which has nothing to do with Jewish or Christian thoughts about heaven. It's where the infamous 72 virgins are, the Houris, H-O-U, the doe-eyed ones. And also, by the way, there's all these things in the hadiths about little boys that are there as well.
Mm.
And it's the idea of a 7th century sheikh like Mohammed, a 7th century rich, leader, what his idea of paradise would look like. Oh, by the way, you can drink alcohol. We can't drink it here, but you can drink it all day long up there, no problem. You can have all these women. Oh, here's another thing about the virgins. They're perpetual virgins. When my wife first heard this term, she got so upset. Because what it means is you have sex with wife number 1, and then say 2 months later you come back to have sex with number 1 again. She's a virgin again. Every time they have sex, they revert back to being a virgin afterwards. Right. So this is, in my opinion, as well as my wife and so many others, there's a sickness about a man who thinks this way.
Mm-hmm.
That this is such a joy in the Muslim mindset that you get to do this with women every single time you have sex. Not to mention having sex with little girls. We'll get to that later. Okay.
What happens to the women when they get to Muslim heaven?
I'm sorry?
What happens to the women when they get to Muslim heaven?
Great question. We're going to bring that up in a minute when we get to hell, because it's really important. I don't like maths.
Yay.
They're dangerous people to me, but the math doesn't make sense any else. Anyway, no. Okay, real quick. You might be a hair's breadth from paradise. In other words, you have been the most faithful Muslim. Not only have you done the Hajj, you've done more than one Hajj. You keep the prayers. You're praying even more than 5 times a day. You're doing everything you're supposed to do. Think the attitude in Micah 6. Okay, I think there's such a great parallel to this mentality because I see it in Buddhism and so many other religions. Should I give 10,000 gallons of oil? Will 1,000 rams make God happy? No. But then this mentality, should I even give up my child? Should I kill my own child for the fruit of my body, for the son of my soul? No, that's not what the law requires. That's not what the Lord requires of you. But to do justice, walk humbly, and be merciful, and all that good stuff. Great passage. Okay, so the parallel in the Muslim world is you've done everything. You've done more than everything. You might be a hair's breadth from paradise, but Allah sends you to hell. Allah, the will of Allah. I mentioned this word 2 weeks ago. Inshallah, 2 ways of saying it is written. It is in the eternal book. Secondly, it is the will of Allah. Whatever happens, good, bad, or indifferent, it's always inshallah, because Allah is the only actor in the universe who are meat puppets. That's the Muslim scholars who talk this way. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've been so faithful, and yet Allah sends me to hell. Inshallah, it was His will. I had no say. Okay, right after that, you may be a hair's breadth from hell. Hell is closer to the Christian view, the traditional kind of Dante-ish view of hell, flames and everything. It's a horrible place. Inhabited, question about women, 2/3 of the people in hell are, in fact, women. So every Muslim warrior gets 72 women, perpetual virgins in paradise, and 2/3. You see the math problem here?
Yeah.
We just need a whole lot more women to make sense out of this. And I don't think many women are going to sign on for this. Okay, so you may be a hair's breadth from hell. In other words, you're the worst Muslim. You never did the Hajj. You didn't even bother to try. You don't do your prayers. You're drinking beer with the buddies at work all the time. You got several girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
You are just a lousy Muslim. You may be a hair's breadth from hell, but Allah sends you to paradise. Inshallah. You see the problem with the story. If you're talking about the security human beings have, most of us have been in ministry for a long time know that one of the questions that many Christians often have is, I know I sinned. Do I know that God's going to take me in? Have I gone too far? This insecurity that's built into the human soul. That's what I see in Buddhism. That's what I see in Micah 6 and other things like this. The Islamic version is this. Even if I'm a good Muslim, I don't know.
Yeah.
And if I'm a bad Muslim, I might get a free pass anyways. So there's insecurity built into the system. Allah, who's called a deceiver, a mischievous, a bad guy in so many ways. There's no, he's not the God of the Bible. That's another part of the discussion. Anyways, this is the one time Allah promises not to lie to you. Pinky promise, He will not lie to you if you die in Shahad. What does that mean? You have to die fighting against the kafir. Okay, that's all you non-Muslim types. Okay, it could be Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, Christian, atheist, whoever. And during Muhammad's lifetime, it was mostly polytheists, the pagans out there. And then Jews and Christians came under his let's just say, deadly scope as well. But to die fighting against them, you get a free pass. Allah promises, regardless of how many sins you've committed. Now, there's all these stories coming out about the guys down in Florida that were part of the 9/11, crew. How they were at strip bars for weeks. And
Right.
without understanding this, it's like, these guys, it doesn't matter if they're getting drunk, they're chasing prostitutes and stuff like this. It doesn't matter because they're going to commit the act.
Right.
And they know they're going to die. Okay, malice aforethought if you're a cop. They know they're going to die, and yet it's okay. Why? Because this is the one time Allah promises. And then I had a lady that's I was talking like this in my board many years ago, and a lady from Indonesia was a missionary down there. He says, "You guys don't understand. They're practicing for heaven, for paradise." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they are." You get to have sex with all these women. You get to drink alcohol all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that was critical.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the sixth pillar. That's why it's so important. I had a Muslim friend. If I told you this story, sorry, I have grandfather moments. I had a good Muslim friend for many years who threatened to kill me if I was too rude against Islam. Did I tell you this story 2 weeks ago?
No.
Okay. So he's from Pakistan. His name was Abdul Wahid Khan. He's considered himself an apologist. And he would come over and we'd spend hours in my church. Went out to have lunch and dinner and all this kind of stuff. And Wahid was 75 years old when I met him. He had been a pilot for the Pakistani Air Force, fought in 6 different wars with India from 1948 till the time I met him, which is like 1992 or 3.
Wow.
6 different wars. And he was so praying there would be another war. Now, can you understand why? He thought at 75 that the government would let him fly again. Why was that important to him?
Jihad.
It's the only way you can know.
Right.
You can have certainty, which all
Security.
you crave. It is security. Certainty of knowing that you will gain paradise. And he couldn't know that. I read a story right after 9/11 when Bush announced that we were basically going to go after Afghanistan. Here's this Rocky Mountain newspaper back in the day. We're going to have to ask your parents about that. Here's a 92-year-old Afghani man so happy the Americans are about to come in and blow everything up. Now, why? Well, you can't know.
Right.
And human beings crave that knowledge. Can I be right with God? Or in this case, can I be right with Allah? Well, if I can't keep the 5 pillars, not to mention the associated growth rate list. Another story is there was a terrible story many years ago. Time magazine does this so badly, like they always do, but this Muslim girl, probably like 16, walked into a Jewish party of girls, mostly 15 or 16, some sort of coming of age party, and blew herself up, killing many of the Jewish girls. And Time magazine puts the circle of violence, like they're equal. No, one's a murderer. The other one is a victim, right? Anyways, this is not written about in the Quran. This is not written about even in the Hadith. What is this girl doing? Well, she left a video or a tape of some sort of communication that her local imam had promised her that 70 members of her own family would gain paradise. Allah promises would gain paradise if she did this. So she killed those Jewish girls. There's nothing about this in the Quran. There's nothing about this in the Hadith. It doesn't matter. It's like local Catholic priests, like I was telling you about in the Philippines, who couldn't tell you what transubstantiation is, or
right.
Treasure of the Saints, or all these important Catholic doctrines, if their life depended on it. This is a guy that's a Muslim leader, and it's the average Muslim to think, well, he's my imam, he must know, and so he can make stuff out of thin air. Welcome to the Muslim world. It's confusing as could be. That's why there's just as many denominations as there is in Christianity, and by the way, in the Catholic Church, and all these different traditions, and then there's the local priest variations of things, and then there's local families that have their own variations because of their particular tribe. Like many, many people, if not close to all people around the world, but I think in the Muslim world it's very strong in Afghanistan and places like this, so strong. Your tribal connection to the Pashtun people, whoever it is, your tribe, that is so important to you. That if this is their version of Islam and it's different from the Saudi version, the Pashtun version is right. Customs and stuff like this. So it's very critical. So welcome to the 6th pillar. Okay. So real quickly here, I don't know how much time we have, Don, so give me an idea so I don't screw this up too much.
Well, 4 minutes ago.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep going. You got it.
It's a relative concept.
We'll give you a few more grace period.
Okay, I only have
Take a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, who is Allah is the next point there. Again, this is so, if again, what we already said before, why he's the same as the God of the Bible. He is the God of the Bible. The Abrahamic religions, Rick Warren's, never mind. This is so foolish. Allah existed long before Muhammad. Muhammad's own father, one of his names included the name Allah. Allah, the God. Allah is the moon god and had been forever. And Muslims are so terribly embarrassed when you find out about this background. You can go all over. The actual name for in pre-Arabic world for the god of the moon was Sin, S-I-N, not pronounced the way English people said it, but you can find crescent moon markers all over that part of the world because that god was so important. Why is it you see a crescent moon on virtually every Muslim flag in the world? Ancient traditions here, gang. Allah himself, the moon god, had 3 daughters. And these are incredibly important to Muslims. Many Muslims will name their girls these names to this day. And you can't understand the story of Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses without understanding the idea of the satanic verses. It's pointing back to this pre-Arabic, or pre-Muhammad, I should say better, the pre-Muhammad version of who Allah actually was. Okay? So even when you read in Jeremiah and other places when it talks about God's bringing judgment against the people and against the tribes that are fighting against Israel, you see him condemn those who worship the sun and the moon and the stars. Well, all you have to do is look at a map, and what do you see? Sun worship. Where's that? Egypt. Over here is the stars. Where's that? Persia. Chaldea, Nebuchadnezzar, Mesopotamia, whatever you want to call it. What's in the moon? He says the moon. So this goes way, way back, this moon worship. And again, Muslims today just fight against that tooth and nail as much as they can. But again, I would argue, again, Allah is a very specific God. He had a specific job. He had daughters. They were stars. Quick version of the Arabic story, the Muslim story, was that, people are trying to evangelize the Quraysh tribe when Muhammad was still in Mecca. It was slow going there. Most of them were still good pagans. And they really liked these 3 daughters. They were really, really in love. That's just one of the Arabic traditions, their favorite deities. Just like you go to Ganesha and, Shiva or Krishna in Hindu parts of the world, there's certain gods that are just stick out. Well, the 3 daughters were very important to the population of Mecca. So some of the guys went to Muhammad and said, hey, if we could just, I know there's only one God and all that good stuff, but if you could just include the 3 daughters and allow people to worship Allah through the 3 daughters, why, we'd have evangelization would go everywhere. So Muhammad said, let me go ask Allah about it. He goes and asks, this is what he always did. He goes ask Allah. He comes back and says, hey, you know what? Allah says it's okay. Worship the 3 daughters. Oh. Hey, isn't that wonderful? Woohoo. So out goes the message. And then some other Muslims come to, excuse me, Muhammad, you made such a big point of this. There is one God. His name is Allah. And all pagan gods, the people who follow them should be killed, blah, 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 blah. So what are you doing? And Muhammad's famous response, this is a paraphrase, but his famous response is, I must have been listening to the devil at that point. So it's the satanic verses, which for the most enlightened, most wonderful prophet who never screwed up ever, it's a terribly embarrassing story, which is why you're not supposed to know about it. So when Salman Rushdie, who's more of an atheist than anything else, when he writes a book titled Satanic Verses, and he gets out to the Western world, well, that's embarrassing because that's reminding most people of that story that they're not supposed to know. Just like you're not supposed to know a Jewish woman killed Muhammad, you're not supposed to know the story about Muhammad saying it's okay to worship these 3 daughters. Big no. So that takes you back to the pre-Muhammad version of who Allah actually was. And again, this crescent moon and this Allah above all other gods, that's what the phrase Allahu Akbar actually means. It doesn't mean, the way they always say God's the one. It means God is greater than the other gods. Well, that existed long before because that was the God of the Quraysh people. Allahu Akbar existed, Muhammad just picked it up like he picked up so many other things. So who is Allah? Allah is horrible. He hates unbelievers. He hates when you call him Father. Not just dislikes, he hates it. You are committing such a great insult to Islam and to Allah himself by calling God Father. And yet the Bible says over and over again, Old and New Testament, by the way, that God is our Father. All right? you can just go right down the line with so many distinctions. When I hear people talk about Abrahamic religions, and I do this in my classes every year, and always get people mad because they bought into this motif. I'm like, well, it's apples and oranges. Is the law of the creator? Yeah, that's what they say. Okay, we're the same. Is the law, not to be associated with anything physically in this world, like the pantheists say or something? Yeah, that's the same too. But is it the same? I mean, there's so many other distinctions, so many more distinctions than there are commonalities. So they're not the same God, not even close. And I think that's important for us as we talk to them to keep that in mind. We're not talking about slightly bending them over. We're talking about a whole different, religious system.
I also think it's interesting how in the Bible, the Quran is constantly trying to say, this affirms the Bible. We're on the same page and stuff. And then you read about the satanic verses and you read Deuteronomy 18 and you realize, oh, so if we're also following the Bible, Mohammed should have been stoned to death for all those verses. So
yeah, well,
Mohammed
beat the Jews to it. He killed all of them that he can get his hands on at the time.
Right.
Good old Khaybar. That's a whole nother fun story I briefly talked about. Who is man? We are meat puppets.
Right.
To talk about man in God's image, it's kind of lost in the Muslim world. Again, he quotes and misquotes the Torah and the New Testament, Torah, the Old Testament, and the Injil, the New Testament. He quotes and misquotes it so many times, it's hard to know just how much he ever knew. It's ignorant. So there's the image of God is obviously in the Torah, or Tarif, yet it's not the same thing, okay? Many people argue that Muslims don't even believe we have an actual soul. That is, we're literally physical beings. And that's why heaven or paradise looks so physical, okay? Because it is physicality. That's all it is. You're not a spiritual being in some meaningful sense. You are just a fleshly being, and that's what paradise looks like. That's a whole other complex argument. So that's real quick. Who is Isa? And this is a question I guess we'll have to end on it because Don's a time Nazi, but pick this up next week. Who is Jesus? Well, that is the critical issue. And Islam is very clear. Muhammad is incredibly clear. Oh, he's the second highest prophet. He did miracles. He's born of a virgin. You think, oh, these guys are Christians, right? Until you get to the only important things. He was not crucified for your sins.
Right.
He did not resurrect. And he is not the Son of God. He is not God. So it takes literally the most important ideas of the Christian faith, the heart of the gospel, and denies them every single time. So when somebody says, as many people are out there saying, again, Rick Warren and others, well, they're so close. No, they're not. They literally take the very heart of the Christian gospel and deny it point by point. This is not a subtlety here. Allah has no son. He repeats it over and over again. Just in case you didn't get it the first time, he makes sure you know. Okay. He was not crucified for sins. He told me this many times. Oh, Allah would never allow anything bad to happen to his prophets. I'm like, did you ever read about Isaiah? Don't you consider him a good prophet? He kind of got treated badly there. It's a terrible argument. So I've had several Muslims, including Wahid, tell me this repeatedly. I'm a better Christian than you are, because I would never say something so horrible as that Jesus called him God. That God is Jesus. Or that Jesus called himself God, or any variation of that. So Muslims are trained to say something like, okay, show me where Jesus said in these words, and these words only, I am God. And you hear it from so many Muslims all over the world in their dawah that you realize, okay, they've been trained to say this. By the way, it's like Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses have all been trained to say, I accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. They learned the language of how to mess with you. So they've learned the language to say to Christians, show me where he says in so many words. And of course, there's innumerable verses that talk about Jesus being God from the Old Testament on into the New Testament. And I wrote it. I got accused. Well, he said, well, that's just Paul. Paul corrupted. So Tarif, the Bible has been corrupted, Old and New Testament. And it's the Apostle Paul who did it. And he's written a whole book on this whole thing, how So I showed him a 7-page single-spaced outline just from the New Testament alone of verses talking about Jesus as God without mentioning Paul once. To which he responded after I gave this to him, well, let's talk about something else. He didn't want to see anything I had to say. He's the same guy that told me that Mohammed prayed for forgiveness for his sins. Oh, no, that's not true. And I'm like, dude, it's right here. I'm literally pointing this on the Quran. He said, no, that's not true. Again, Muslim tradition often outweighs even Muslim scripture.
Also in Surah 6, 115, it talks about how no one could corrupt Allah's word. So if the Bible is supposedly Allah's word, which is why the Quran is constantly like, why don't you understand this, you stupid dimwits, then their entire argument still falls apart just based on that one verse.
Was
Because now they're
that,
saying that
was that a play on the word Dimmy? Is that what you just did? A Dhimmi
Yeah.
is all Jews and Christians who are allowed to survive as long as they don't do anything that offends a Muslim in almost any way. You have to pay the jizya, special tax, all that fun stuff, which we didn't talk about. But
Right.
Isa is the heart of the whole thing. And it's the heart of us as Christians. You know, when we're talking to Mormons this last week or New Agers, next time the Heart Christian on Saturday, whoever we're talking to, it's about who Jesus is.
It's always that. Yeah.
And it's so critical. And so Islam is very clear about this. No, no, and heck no. He is not God. That's shirk. Ultimate blasphemer. We as Christians commit the ultimate sin. Therefore, it's okay to kill us.
Right.
Muslims, according to Islam, and I've been around a lot of Jewish people, they worship Moses and say he's divine. I have never read a Muslim source, or excuse me, a Jewish source yet calling him divine. So if there's out there, somebody can give me a heads up on this one. But that's the accusation, which is why it's okay to kill Jews and okay to kill Christians, because they're both committing shirk. Now, Hindus for sure commit shirk with every breath of their body, and that's why Muslims and Hindus have been killing each other for about 1,200 years at least that we know of.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, we're guilty of shirk because we say Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is God. And so for a Muslim, they see themselves, I have to help my Christian friend. I like this guy. I have to help him understand he's blaspheming. He needs to stop before he gets killed. I mean, that's a good intention, as it were, in this case, from their mindset, okay? So Jesus is this great prophet, number 2 behind Mohammed. And we'll talk about ways to use this in how we witness to them in 2 weeks. But just to understand what they think of. They think they are liberating women. I mentioned that 2 weeks ago from the evil West because of, well, we are corrupt as could be. They're half right there.
Yeah.
They think that we've committed shirk and we are in the process of committing shirk. And those of us that are Jesus freaks, hardcore, well, we're just the worst of blasphemers that there are.
Bad.
We've insulted Allah because we've elevated Jesus to a place no man should be. And, oh, by the way, he's not even above Muhammad. And you might ask the question, we'll go into more detail in 2 weeks. Well, if Jesus did all these miracles and he's born of a virgin, he's, you know, blah, blah, how is he not greater than Muhammad? Muhammad did no miracles in his lifetime. Well, the Quran is his miracle. We'll get to that later. Muhammad, you know, did no miracles. He was not born of a virgin, you know. Jesus, even in the Quran, comes off very unique and very special. Even though, again, they still attack the heart of the Christian faith. And he knew that when he wrote it.
Sure. So
it's very important. Mecca period, again, the early part, Jews and Christians are our buddies. Medina part of the Quran, no. You got to kill them, especially the Jews, which understand the animosity to this moment. That's really critical. And it comes back to, in many ways, who is Jesus. So I can go on, but we need to stop. Is there any more questions or thoughts, guys?
I think it's also funny how in the Quran, it's like one of its main claims to its veracity is basically like no one can write even a single verse like the Quran. I just asked Grok to do it. It reads almost exactly like Al-Baqarah.
Yeah.
It's not only that, but I think no human writer would legit try to write a verse like the Quran because if they did, they'd be so ashamed they would burn it and then hurl themselves off a bridge. It's just that bad.
Hey, Don, next week we're going to let Morgan teach because okay. You say you're right. Iftikhar, I'm sorry if I'm saying that so badly, but your verse is entirely appropriate on the 72 hurries and stuff like this. There was a question earlier, and I forgot it. That somebody came in with. What was that? Do you have access to that?
There were.
What is it up? There was one back here.
You know what? Why don't we call it a night on air here? If we need to do something a couple minutes afterwards, we can do that. But we're running hour 20 at this point. So
what's your problem? Sorry, everybody. Don's mother says he has to be in, before he turns into a pumpkin.
Well, other than I've been at it since 6 o'clock this morning,
And when
Yeah, I know.
You know, potato.
Time Nazi. So
Yeah,
that's
that's right.
fine.
So next week, 8 o'clock Central Time, come back and we're gonna continue on. Hopefully
Absolutely.
on
all
our
right, God bless you all.
married chase.
Take
So
care.
thank you all.
Go share the gospel with people.
That's
Absolutely.
right.